Well, yeah, Reggie Adams. I'm a political theorist. I've just completed my book, What the World Needs Now, and it's very relevant to what we're doing here today with the World Kindness Day. If I may share my screen, I'll just go through a sort of it's a slideshow. It helps keep me rooted to my points. Otherwise, I go off on all kinds of tangents. So on World Kindness Day, my position on it is that my focus is really how we nurture kindness within society. So there's so much that we can do to project kindness in our actions every day, in the hope that that will influence others, behaviors of others. But I do think we have to start thinking about it in our society, and in particular, bring it alive as a concept in our political arena. Because if you ask anyone, really, should there be more kindness in society, there will be an overwhelming yes to this. There's no one that's going to kind of stand there disagreeing and saying, no, I think kindness is a bad thing for society. It is a universally agreeable concept. If only we can promote it more within the political arena. Now, once we have a universal agreeable position, that brings out collaboration in people. But our political constructs tend to be divisive. They're based on a sort of Socratic or Platonic dialogue method that is divisive in its nature. So we think of politics as something that divides us, but really we have to refocus on what the role of politics is in society, and focus on where we want to be taken as a society. And that's where we build the kindness in. That's where we envisage how we introduce well-being in society. Because it's if you're saying, we should all be more kind, it's idealistic thinking. I don't dismiss that we are all able to do it, but when you talk about it as a political idea, people just dismiss it straight away as a too idealistic thinking. And of course, I don't, because I've dug down into it, and I've got a whole book's worth of ideas based on if we do start thinking that way, how we start building compassion in society. Now, I don't dismiss that political theorists in the past have been motivated by these ideas. If you read John Locke's essay on human understanding, or Adam Smith's theory of moral sentiment, you'll find these an outpouring of compassion for people, and they promote the very virtue of kindness in society. And if you look at William Beveridge's Beveridge Report, it's a testament to human kindness. It was completed in an era where Britain was reconstructing itself after the war, and at a time where people were unified in rebuilding their communities, their societies, and their lives after the devastation of war. So it has, been there, what we've been working towards as human civilizations. But I suggest that there's other ideas that have crept in that are taking us in the wrong direction more recently. And that has to be sort of pointed out. There was a period of change in the late 70s going into the 80s, where we adopted what's now become known as neoliberalism. And these ideas, I think at the time, the idea that it would create economic growth, therefore abundance, and therefore it would give us tax revenue and all kinds of things for distributing that wealth to people that needed it. So I don't dismiss that the ideas of the time were for the benefit of society. But I think after 40 years of really adopting those mostly economic principles, I don't think it's taken us in the right direction. And I think we have to be aware, and we have to take ourselves off of that path and back towards something that is genuinely taking us towards a position of well-being for individuals and for society as a whole. So this, the neoliberalism has really deconstructed a lot of what we had been working towards the welfare state, towards society agreeing to build safety nets and look after people at their most vulnerable. But the neoliberal theory has worked its way in, and it's the prevailing theory, even on the left. You know, it's still the economic policies that support this neoliberal economic theory, and we have to sort of start to debunk it now. We've got 30, 40 years of data where we have to start seeing what's going on and then adjusting and reviewing that economic theory. So if you look at most of the world's largest organization, the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, they all insist, if they're supporting a development in a country, they insist on a certain set of neoliberal principles. And again, I don't think it's serving the people in those countries. So if you look at Britain, for example, just the wealth divide is increased from that turning point in 79, where these policies were adopted. You can see at a glance in there's charts like this all over the world. But when these theories start being adopted into economic policy, and it's devastating the world. As we know, the largest corporations are doing okay from the theory, but people are suffering, and as we all know, the planet is suffering. People are thrown into further hardship, to poverty and debt, and it's destroying the environment. We know that, and it's destroying the environment mostly, you know, because we're not collectively organizing ourselves to build the constructs within which capitalism, free market economics works. And largely that's due to the archaic, really, nature of our democratic systems, that they haven't really evolved in centuries, you know, and it's proving to really support those who have most to gain out society, those who profit most from what everybody does in their society. So we know that lobbying is a multi-billion-dollar business, you know, all over the world. We know that MPs directly work for other interests outside their job as an MP. We know that political campaigns are funded by those corporations who will benefit most from the policies that the party will produce. And we know that think tanks, particularly right-wing think tanks, are funded by big business to produce information, the information through tabloid media, largely Baron owned. So there's, you know, we have to be aware of the encroachment of the needs of corporations in our democratic system, and we have to also overcome that. So one thing that we should, there should be hope for, though, is that there is a whole school of thought born out of how we help developing countries in particular, but how countries can identify areas of human well-being and specifically transfer resources to helping communities and their populations out on a number of levels: education, health, you know, just general infrastructure. And so countries are starting to, from this school of thought, countries are starting to look at their own achievements in terms of human development across a number of indices. And this is an area, a school of thought, that I think gives us hope. And it's largely driven by the work of charities, of pushing this agenda. What do people need? Where do they need it? And then that having an influence on the political arena. And it is really where we convert wealth to welfare, or to the well-being of people. And it's an alternative, really, to measuring the success of a nature in terms of GDP, which was only really meant for how investable the country is. But so this school of thought, there's several international organizations that work on these ideas, and it is really how to identify areas of in society where we can increase the well-being of people in society. The OECD, for example, have a better life index, and they identify a number of categories, and then so they can narrow down specifically where they need to help people. Douglas Bill's SEDA, 10 Dimensions of Well-being, is another way of categorizing how we define and measure well-being in society. There's some work there's the UN Millennium Development Goals, very specific goals. There's the Martha Nussbaum, a political theorist, and Amartya Sen have a capabilities approach, very similar sort of approach. But I'm suggesting that this whole school of thought is not just a sort of sideline that's emerged over the last couple of decades, really. I suggest this is a whole new political theory, and it could be put into practice. And I that's why I've dug down into it in my book. So I've given it a name. I'm sort of calling it out, and helping to sort of identify it, expose it a little bit, and to suggest this is what we need to rally around, as a 21st century political theory. I've given it the name political humanism. Now, others may identify it at some point and call it something else, but for now, this is how I refer to it. And it is really, you define it by saying that there are agreeable positions to people in society to collaborate on a series of defined agreeable societal objectives. And I categorize them into 12 areas, 12 general areas. Each one of these can be further broken down into certain, it's made up of whole other factors. So if you take education, for example, it's an agreeable position that we want society to be better educated, but it's not just sort of exam results at school leaving age or university results. It's how perhaps the school leavers, university leavers are adapted to the job market, perhaps, but also for the individual, how that individual is empowered or reaching a point of self-actualization, or how they're prepared socially, emotionally, or prepared for citizenship. If the education is providing the nation with its entrepreneurs, inventors, innovators, so that society itself progresses, so that we see some human progress. So each one of these main categories is made up of, a whole series of factors. And essentially that's what, that's the core of my writing. And I call that, this is my book, What the World Needs Now. I don't know if some of you recognize that, that's the Burt Bacharach song. And it is the principle of, what the world needs now. And if you know the song, the answer to that is love, sweet love. And it's really building these core principles into economic theory. Because as soon as you say it, it just sounds too idealistic unless you work it through, unless you say exactly what it means specifically. And by identifying what well-being is in society, what it means for the individual, for society as a whole, you can be quite specific and detailed of what that means for policy, what that means for institutional organization, etc. So this is an introduction to political humanism, and I call it a theory of well-being. It is a political theory, but I do dig down into its sort of philosophical roots. I talk about the nature of our individual relationship to society. What are some of the dynamics of that? What can be observed in philosophy, global philosophy across the stretch of human history, and some of the elements that we've collaborated on as social creatures in societies, and it helps us identify why we build the institutions that we do. So it's one part political theory, but it's a philosophical route. It becomes later an economic theory. So the economic theory is based around just the ideal of how we best increase human well-being along a number of factors. But I dig down, or I go into detail about how then we may campaign for public policy, but also systemic change, and how that in turn will lead to sort of cultural change. And I want to sort of point out, it sort of sounds, a lot of people at this point, it sounds a little bit too idealistic, but I want to, or perhaps oversimplified, but I want to point out sort of what a profoundly different perspective it gives you when you start applying it to political change or social change. And that's why I use the thing, for surviving the 21st century, because I do think it's worth, investing our time and energy into our sort of social political awareness, so that to get over this period, because it's becoming even more divisive. The planet is suffering even more, to the point where, when certain cycles happen in the ecosystems, it's difficult to work our way back from certain releases of methane and all these kind of things. So we are at a really crucial time in human history that we don't do too much damage to the planet. We have to reverse from the damage we're doing and the reasons behind that damage. So it gives us a profoundly different perspective, mostly because it gives us a rallying point that from the outset, we are all agreeing to get behind a notion that will improve human well-being for one and all. And this is an agreeable collective moral endeavor. So it's a political theory that takes human kindness, compassion for humanity at its very core. It gives us organizational structure. So now once we know what society is here to achieve, we can also build those institutions and executive branches of government and things like that to best achieve those, and best achieve them for what we're prepared to put into them in terms of tax, in terms of our behaviors, and etc. So it also brings complete accountability to governance, because there is, once you identify the purpose of governance, it really only it narrows down the function of governance. So all what we do, the division, the party politics, and on all of that during the legislative process, could be diminished to some extent. I mean, the importance is on the achievement of well-being, and so it shifts that focus and that inefficiency. And also it underpins social contract. So if you're collectively thinking on how we make the world a better place, how we make our society, our community a better place, then it gels society together. It makes you think that while you're out there with your own ambitions, you are also your social self is also part of the contribution to making society a better place in the same way. So this is what I knuckled down on in the book. I start off with focusing, really turning the idealism into practical format. I spend the intro talking on political humanism as a political theory to compete with other political theories, to say it's where it's born out of. It's born out of ideas like Jeremy Bentham's utilitarianism, but it's more defined, as the end goal of well-being is so much more defined. So I call it a post-utilitarian position. I also talk about it as emerging from liberalism, so that it takes on the merits of liberalism, but because it treats well-being as the end result, you can see that liberalism has provided us with certain tools towards well-being. But it in a sense, it breaks from well-being because the tools of well-being are not the end results themselves. I don't know if that makes sense to some people, but so I call it also a post-liberal position. But to make it clear, it's I have to say it's not an illiberal position. I call it post-liberalism. So I do all that. I also sort of, because it sounds like I'm going after the right all the time, where I break down neoliberalism, I also compare it to communism. It rejects the idea of communism, so it's nothing like that. But in the first 4 chapters, I talk about how we may reform some of the areas of our society. I start with the political arena, going on to how the economic theory plays out, and then into the other parts of our society, justice, health, education, and then into more sort of global things like the environment and global relations. As I call them also reforms, because each area that I talk about, I do try and discuss how we may practically go about making these changes, both as a sort of any political motive, but also in society as well. So it's bottom up, top down sort of approach. So just if I've got a little bit more time, I'll just break down what I tried to do within each chapter. So this is really taking the core of the philosophy of turning it into political theory, but then showing how that informs us of how we can reform different aspects of our institutions, our society. So in my first chapter, I take straight on our legislative part of governance and say how we may be able to evolve the way we do democracy with the use of technology. Myself and some programmers, designers have been working on an app. It's like a kind of Facebook for politics, loads of functions it's got. But the intention is that it at least influences what goes on in Parliament. There's different elements of consensus. There's different things you do within your constituency or as a nation, like consensus results. It mirrors what some of the other apps are doing out there, but it ties it all into one program. We want to intellectualize the debate, so there's a lot of fact checking and things like this. We want to rationalize people's positions so that people are aware of the opposing positions, things like that. So it has these different objectives. So it's something we're trying to practically work on. And the idea that it sort of goes in phases where it becomes a way of engaging people with politics, but then it eventually to turn that into influence in Parliament, and then changing the system itself once it's road tested and the kinks are worked out and things like that. So it's kind of an ambitious plan to evolve our democracy. I talk about what a British constitution might look like if it adopted the notion of political humanism. Then I look at the other, very much with the separation of powers. I look at, once we've looked at the legislative part, if we had a constitution, look at the judicial part of it, and then how that would affect our empowering our executive bodies, police and school boards and the health services and things like that, but how we regulate them, and the regulator being empowered by the judiciary, empowered by the constitution. So this kind of perfect sort of separation of powers idea. Because if we don't regulate those executive bodies, without authority, without accountability, could lead to tyranny. So that, which is chapter 4. I talk about the tax system, how we may directly assign taxation towards societal aims, and the reasons for that, the equilibrium, the efficiency, the moral imperative. I talk about a sort of technical change with our sort of money system. It's about where our private banks are allowed to create money as debt, these things. I'm talking about some of the technical change we may do as a reform. But then I lay into, showing how the political theory then becomes an economic theory, and how that creates a culture. I call it #pop capitalism, how that creates a culture of distributed capitalism. I don't want to get too technical at this time of the morning and the day. So it has this economic theory that works alongside it. If we do have a written constitution, we would look towards having a reform of the justice system. If we do empower our executive, we look at how this may affect social care, integrating it with healthcare. Look at how the core philosophy itself informs what we may be able to do further for our education system. And all that is really based on the sort of the nation state perspective. But then chapters 11 and 12, I do start translating in that of what that means for the world, particularly with our movement towards environmentalism, how we may learn to live more symbiotically with us and the environment, how we can build a sustainable future. And the last chapter is how the core philosophy itself informs how we do global relations. So how maybe we can reform the United Nations from a perspective of a united people. So I won't reach to the end of my things yet. So that's all available. I'm always up for talks on this. Contact me, ra@reggieadams.com. Politicalhumanism.org is where the book is available at the moment, although it will be distributed soon. I've only just launched it. And please engage with me at Twitter, Reggie66. But the core principle itself, really, it also leads us, and tying it back into Kindness Day, it does lead us to this notion that we only achieve more through collaboration. As Newton said, wasn't it? I've achieved what I've achieved by standing on the shoulders of giants. The idea being that he only achieved these things not in solitude, although he was in a kind of lockdown at the time, but because he had the scientific community providing him with things. The microscope was just invented, etc., etc. So his point was that we do things best in collaboration, but our political arena is divisive by its nature. So on Kindness Day, I think the kindest thing we can do is try to go beyond being politically divided. And that is, we could do that by, the next time you engage with someone politically, you listen to their point of view, and you may think, oh, this is someone from a different camp, from a different supporting a different party or something like that. But I think you can engage them and ask them what their end goal is, to see if you share the end vision of if their idea will make the world a better place. Get them to focus on that. Do they think their ideas will make the world a better place? If not, is it worth supporting?
Wow.
And when you do that, you're instantly coming out of this divisiveness, and you're starting to have a discussion in a notion of collaboration. And I think only through this, through unity, can you build collaboration. And
Wow.
this is the route to making the world a better place.
That's such a great finish.
So
Thank you so much, Reggie. I really, really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so
sorry to
much.
bombard
I'm very glad that you.
politics.
Yeah, I'm very glad you shared your book. Congratulations. Is it a new book that's just come out?
So yeah, it's a new book, What the World Needs Now. It's
Wonderful.
right here.
Great.
Yeah, I've just launched it. That's why Calvin.
Congratulations. Well, congratulations. I'm glad that Calvin.
It's distributed through politicalhumanism.org at the moment, but it will be available for Amazon and everything shortly.
Excellent, excellent. I just want to read one comment here, which is a really nice comment just to finish, which is from Gloria, who says, "Hi, Reggie. I've just had a look at the Humanist Party website. It's simply amazing. I love it and will certainly contact you. It resonated with me, my values and belief. Thank you very much for sharing your lovely thoughts and for leading this movement and project. Makes me feel that my dreams for a better society are definitely tangible. I can't wait to learn more about Magna Socia and how I can contribute." Wonderful. Well, and we've got some more nice comments coming through here from Claire. Fascinating. Connected to some other ideas by Thomas Bjorkman's work on the inner compass. And Christine says, looking forward to reading your book. So we're going to have to go on to our next speaker now.